He left her on the day she needed him the most. He walked away from the farm, from their future, from the promises spoken in the softness of youth. Hannah watched the only man she had ever loved disappear down a gravel road, choosing a world of money, lights, and ambition over the quiet love she offered. And for years she believed she simply wasn't enough. But God has a way of bringing back what we think is gone forever. Sometimes after it's been broken, sometimes after it's been rebuilt, and sometimes when the heart least expects it. Years later, Carter returns to the small town he abandoned, not as the proud boy who left, but as a man marked by success on the outside and emptiness on the inside. A man who finally understood that wealth without love is poverty. Hannah, however, is not the same girl he left behind. Stronger, steadier, a woman who learned to survive without him, even when her heart never fully healed. This is a story about abandonment, regret, and a return no one imagined. A story where God rewrites what pain tried to erase. Stay until the end, because when God restores, nothing remains the same. Subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more stories of faith, love, and redemption. Hannah heard the sound of an engine long before she saw the truck on the old gravel road. It was late afternoon in Willow Creek, the sun sliding low over the cornfields and turning the dust to gold. Most days that sound meant neighbors, deliveries, ordinary life in a small American town. But something in her chest tightened, a quiet warning she couldn't explain. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped out onto the porch, heart beating harder than the moment deserved. A black truck rolled slowly into view, too new, too polished to belong to anybody local. And before she even saw his face, she knew exactly who it was. Carter Whitaker hadn't set foot in Willow Creek in nearly a decade. He had left chasing skyscrapers, boardrooms, and a life so far from the farm that dust never touched his shoes again. The boy who once fixed fences and dreamed under the stars with her had become the man in tailored suits on magazine covers. Hannah had seen pictures of him online by accident once, standing beside a woman in a red dress, smiling like nothing back here existed. That was the night she stopped praying for him to return. Or at least, that was what she told herself to sleep. Now he was back on the same road he'd used to leave her behind. The truck stopped in front of the farmhouse and the engine cut off, leaving only the sound of cicadas and her own pulse in her ears. Carter stepped out wearing jeans and boots instead of a suit, as if the town itself had demanded he come back honest. He looked older, broader in the shoulders, his hair slightly messed by the wind instead of perfectly styled. Success had carved sharp lines into his face, but something softer, almost wounded, lived in his eyes. He took a breath like a man walking into court, not home. Hannah fought the urge to turn around and go back inside, to pretend she hadn't seen him. But she had learned to face storms, and this one had her name all over it. "Hey, Hannah," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered, like it had scraped against too many late nights and hard truths. The last time he said her name, it was in a barn full of promises and summer dust. Now it landed between them like something fragile and heavy at the same time. She didn't smile, didn't rush to close the distance, didn't pretend the years hadn't split them apart. "You're a long way from your glass towers," she answered, leaning against the porch post to steady herself. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was the voice of a woman who had survived him. He glanced at the farmhouse, the barn, the fields stretching out behind her as if cataloging everything he had walked away from. "Place looks good," he said quietly, and for once it didn't sound like small talk. It sounded like respect. Hannah shrugged, trying not to feel anything at all. "It had to," she replied. "The farm doesn't stop just because somebody decides to go find himself in another zip code." His jaw tightened, but he didn't defend himself, and that unsettled her more than anger would have. He had always been quick with explanations and big dreams. Today, he just stood there and took the truth. "I heard about your parents," he said softly after a moment, eyes dropping to the worn boards under his boots. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when—" The words faded, but the ache around them stayed. Grief pressed against Hannah's ribs like it always did when Algem mentioned them. She remembered hospital rooms, the weight of paperwork, the silent decision to keep the farm alive alone. "You weren't here for anything," she replied, Not harsh, just honest. And the honesty stung both of them. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, and the late summer air felt thick, like the sky before a storm. A dog barked somewhere down the road. Country music drifted faintly from a neighbor's open window, and the smell of cut hay hung in the air. To anyone else, it was just another quiet evening in a small American town. To Hannah, it felt like a reckoning. Carter shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable in a place that once fit him like a second skin. "I bought the old Sawyer place," he finally said, glancing toward the west fields. "I figured you'd hear it from someone else, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." A dozen emotions tried to climb up Hannah's throat at once. Shock, anger, confusion, something almost like panic. O Sawyer Farm had been abandoned for years, its fences sagging, its fields growing wild behind a faded for sale sign. As kids, they used to say that whoever bought it would be the luckiest person in town. Back then, they pictured themselves. "So you're not just visiting," she said slowly, tasting each word so she wouldn't choke on it. "You're staying." He nodded, eyes never leaving her face. "Yeah, I am." The simplicity of the answer terrified her more than any speech he could have given. He wasn't just a shadow from the past passing through for a nostalgic drive. He was planting himself back into the landscape of a life she had finally learned to live without him. "Why?" she asked, before she could stop herself. It came out quieter than she meant, but sharper too. Carter swallowed, glancing at the horizon where the sky was turning orange and pink over the fields. "Because somewhere between all the deals and the flights and the late nights, I realized I'd built a life that looked good in photos and felt empty in person," he said. "I thought success would fix everything broken in me." He gave a humorless laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Turns out it just made the echo louder. The honesty in his voice was disarming. Hannah wasn't ready for honesty from him, not yet. "You could have stayed and built something here," she replied, folding her arms as if she could keep her heart from spilling out. "We had plans, remember?" A barn turned into a wedding venue, a big white house on the hill, seasons measured by harvest and not by quarterly reports. They had once mapped out their whole lives under the stars, barefoot in the hay. He nodded slowly, shame flickering across his features like a shadow. "I remember everything," he said. For a long time, I tried not to. Memories Hannah had buried began to tug at her. The 4th of July by the lake, promises whispered in the bed of his old truck, the night he asked her to wait for him. She had waited at first, through months of calls that got shorter and less frequent, through excuses that started sounding like scripts, until one picture and one caption made something inside her finally snap. A city event. City woman. City smile. "You moved on pretty fast," she said now, not looking at him. At least the camera made it look that way. He winced, like she'd hit a bruise that never healed. "I told myself I had to," he admitted, "that I'd chosen a different life and there was no point looking back." He blew out a breath, jaw tight. But every time something went wrong, every time a night felt too quiet, every time I wondered who I was becoming, it was this place that came to mind. He glanced at the fields again. "It was you." The words slid under her defenses whether she wanted them to or not. She hated that her heart responded before her mind could shut it down. It wasn't fair that he could still shake the ground she walked on with a single confession. "You don't get to say things like that and expect it to fix anything," she replied. Her voice shook, and that angered her most of all. "You left, Carter. You don't just walk back and claim a chapter you abandoned." He didn't argue, didn't reach for her, didn't try to close the distance with a touch he no longer had the right to offer. Instead, he stood there in the fading light, hands in his pockets like a boy caught doing something wrong. "I know I don't deserve a place in your life," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve this porch, this view, this conversation." He lifted his gaze, and for the first time she saw it clearly. Regret burned into the green of his eyes. "But I needed to come back and at least stop pretending I didn't break something I should have protected." The honesty almost hurt more than the silence of the past years. Hannah wasn't used to him taking responsibility. She was used to him chasing the next horizon. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the yard, wrapping the farmhouse in familiar evening peace. She wished her heart felt as calm as the view. "You came back." she finally said, more to herself than to him. But I'm not the same girl who watched you leave. And that, more than anything, was the truth he had to face. He nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a sentence he knew he'd earned. I can see that, he replied. You look stronger. O elogio caiu em lugar que ela não queria que ele tocasse, em algum ponto entre antigas feridas e novos muros. Ela se afastou do pilar da varanda e alcançou a maçaneta da porta. A conversa pesada o suficiente para uma noite só. I've got chores to finish before dark, she said. Farm doesn't care who comes back into town. Her hand was on the doorknob when he spoke novamente. Voz mais suave que a brisa passando pelas árvores. Hannah? She paused but didn't turn. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I just wanted you to know I'm here now. There was a silence where she could have said 100 things and chose none. Then she opened the door and went inside, leaving him standing on the porch of the life he once left behind. The next morning smelled like rain, heavy clouds stretching low over the fields as Hannah loaded bags of feed into the bed of her old pickup. Farm chores didn't pause for emotional earthquakes, and she was grateful. Work kept her hands busy when her mind felt too loud. The gravel crunched under her boots, grounding her in the routine she had built alone. As she tied down the tarp, the wind picked up, rattling the barn doors. It was the kind of morning that mirrored her mood, unsettled, unpredictable. And she didn't want to admit she wondered if Carter was awake too. The drive into town was quiet except for country radio humming softly through the speakers. The back roads of Willow Creek were familiar, fields on both sides, red barns, horses grazing near fences. Saturday mornings usually meant the local farmers market and coffee at Pearl's Cafe. But today, clouds rolled in like a warning, darkening the edges of the sky. Hannah tightened her grip on the steering wheel, pushing away the thought of the man who had shown up yesterday. She refused to let his return hijack her thoughts. At least, she tried. Halfway to town, she noticed a shiny silver truck parked crooked on the shoulder. The hood was popped open, steam curling into the air like a signal flare. She slowed, partly out of instinct, partly out of habit. Around here, you didn't pass someone stranded, not even a stranger. But as she pulled closer, recognition hit her hard in the stomach. Of course, of all people to find stranded on the back road during a storm warning. Carter. He was leaning over the engine, rain already starting to fall in thin diagonal lines. His once perfect confidence looked out of place against the sputtering truck and the mud beginning to cling to his boots. Hannah rolled down the passenger window just enough to be civil. Looks like the city forgot to teach you how to check coolant, she called, her voice steady but her pulse far from it. Carter turned, rain dripping from his hair, expression equal parts frustration and embarrassment. Morning to you too, he answered. It overheated. You don't say, she replied, arching an eyebrow the way she used to when they were teenagers fixing tractors together. Rain began hitting harder, drumming across both trucks and soaking the dusty road. You got anyone coming to help? He shook his head. Called the tow, but they said it'll be at least an hour. Storm slowing everything. Hannah sighed, resisting the pull of old memories she didn't ask for. You'll drown out here before they come. She hated the way her heart nudged her toward kindness. If it was anyone else, she would have grabbed a towel from the back and started helping without hesitation. But this was Carter, the boy who left her behind and the man who showed up years too late. Still something in the way he stood there, soaked, humbled, unsure. It reminded her of the boy he used to be, the one who would have stood in the rain for her without thinking. Get in, she finally said. Carter blinked as if unsure she meant it. I don't want to. It's raining. Not an invitation, she interrupted. Just get in the truck, Carter. He opened the door and slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from his jacket onto the seat he once sat in as a teenager, laughing and stealing glances at her. Now he sat stiff, awkward, careful with every movement. She didn't look at him when she put the truck in drive. For a while they drove in silence, the steady rhythm of rain on the roof filling the space between them. Water streaked down the windows, blurring the fields into watercolor smudges of gold and green. Carter watched them quietly, shoulders tense. This place, it looks different than I remember, he finally said, voice soft. Everything does when you've been gone too long. Hannah didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice to stay steady. He shifted, glancing at her cautiously. "You're upset I bought the Sawyer place." She tightened her jaw. "I'm not upset," she replied, eyes fixed on the road. "I'm processing the idea of him being in town permanently, processing the fact that he would be at the grocery store, the diner, the town fair, everywhere she had built a life without him. It's a lot," she admitted. Carter nodded, rain-soaked hair falling slightly over his forehead. "I didn't come back to make things harder for you," he said. "That wasn't the plan." Hannah snorted softly. "Funny. Your plans don't have a great track record when it comes to us." He flinched at the truth. "I know." The simplicity of the words made her chest tighten more than any apology would have. They reached the small bridge over Willow Creek, rain hitting the metal railings with sharp metallic taps. For a second, Hannah slowed, old memories rising, late-night drives, whispered promises on this very bridge, a kiss that tasted like summer and forever. She shook them off quickly. "Where were you headed anyway?" "Hardware store," he answered. "Trying to get the Sawyer place livable before the storm season hits." Hannah gave a reluctant nod. "You're gonna need more than tools," she said. "That place hasn't had a working roof in years." Carter chuckled, the sound low and surprisingly warm. "Yeah, I figured that out when rain started dripping onto the mattress last night." She nearly smiled but caught it just in time. "Welcome back to country living," she said instead. "No refund policy." When they reached town, she pulled into the hardware store parking lot, rain still pounding like fingertips tapping the roof. Carter didn't move right away. He stared at the dashboard, breathing slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "Hannah," he said softly, "you didn't have to stop for me today. You could have driven past." She looked straight ahead. "I know." Silence settled again, heavier this time, full of things unsaid. Carter exhaled and reached for the door handle. "Thank you," he said, voice quiet but sincere. Not dramatic, not desperate, just real. And for some reason, that sincerity unsettled her more than all the explanations in the world. He stepped out into the rain, closing the door gently behind him. Hannah watched him walk toward the store, shoulders hunched against the storm. She waited until he disappeared inside before letting out the breath she'd been holding. She hadn't planned on helping him. She hadn't planned on feeling anything at all. But storms have a way of uncovering things you thought you'd buried. And this one was only getting started. The Willow Creek Fall Festival was the biggest event of the season, a tradition older than most barns in town. Every October, families lined Main Street with hay bales, scarecrows, and tables of homemade pies. The scent of cinnamon apples, roasted pecans, and pumpkin spice drifted through the crisp, cool air. Kids ran around with caramel apples. Teenagers carved pumpkins behind the library. Hannah spent every year helping at the harvest booth, serving warm cider and fresh corn muffins. It was predictable, comforting, safe. At least, it used to be. She arrived early, her flannel jacket pulled tight against the wind. Her booth was already set up beneath oak trees glowing orange and gold. She checked the cider pot, stirred the apples, and arranged the baskets for display. People waved as they walked by. Hannah was part of Willow Creek's fabric now. Someone who stayed. Someone dependable. Someone who didn't leave. Around mid-morning, she was handing out cups of steaming cider when she felt it. A shift in the air behind her, like the world paused for half a second. She turned and there he was. Carter Whitaker, dressed in a plaid shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands in pockets, blending into small-town life in a way that felt too easy, too familiar, too dangerous. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He gave a small, hesitant smile, the kind people wear when stepping into a memory they aren't sure they're welcome in. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said, even though he absolutely knew she'd be here. Fall Festival was Hannah's favorite event growing up. They used to come together every year. She raised an eyebrow. "Everyone's here. And you still know how to make an entrance," she added under her breath. "Need help?" he asked, nodding toward the line forming at her booth. She almost laughed. "You? Working a harvest booth? I'm not sure the festival insurance covers that." But the truth was, the line was getting longer, and she was already juggling too much. Before she could protest, Carter stepped behind the booth, grabbed an apron, and tied it around his waist. Backwards. "Try again," she said, fighting a smile. He fixed it, cheeks slightly flushed, and she hated how human that made him look. Then he started handing out cider with surprising efficiency, and even more surprising charm. Kids giggled when he made silly faces, adults smiled when he remembered their names, and even Mrs. Callahan, the town's resident judge of everything, complimented him on his pleasant manners. Hannah tried to stay annoyed, but he blended into the rhythm of the festival like he'd never left, and that unsettled her more than anything. When the rush finally slowed, Carter wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "I forgot how much work this is," he said between breaths. "City life doesn't have you serving cider to half the town." Hannah smirked. "No, but it probably has you signing autographs or something." He rolled his eyes. "Only when I'm unlucky." They both turned when a group of local musicians began tuning guitars near the gazebo. The air filled with warm chords, the kind you feel in your chest more than your ears. Couples danced slowly on the grass, boots shuffling gently over fallen leaves. Hannah looked away quickly. She didn't want him seeing her remember the nights they danced here as teenagers, heart against heart. But Carter saw the flicker in her expression anyway. He always had. He stayed quiet for a moment before speaking. "Hannah," the way he said her name, soft, careful, almost reverent, made her chest tighten. "I know I don't get to erase the past, and I'm not trying to." She stiffened. "I just want to be honest with you," he continued. "I'm here because I needed a change. But I also came back because of you." Her breath caught, but she didn't let it show. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't say things you can't follow through on. We're not kids anymore." Carter nodded, gaze steady. "That's exactly why I'm saying it." The honesty in his voice felt too heavy, too raw, too real. Before she could respond, a neighbor's son tripped near the booth, sending a basket of apples flying. Instinctively, Carter lunged forward, catching the boy before he hit the ground. The boy looked up at him, wide-eyed, and whispered, "Thanks, mister." Carter smiled softly. "No problem, buddy." Hannah blinked, surprised at the gentleness of the scene. He used to be gentle all the time, before ambition reshaped him. As afternoon faded into golden evening, Hannah packed up the booth. Carter stayed silently by her side, folding boxes, stacking crates, cleaning up spilled cider without being asked. She wanted to tell him to go. She wanted to tell him to stay. She managed neither. "What are you doing after this?" he asked. "Heading home," she answered. His swallow was barely noticeable, barely. "Would you—" he started, then paused, nerves visible in the way he shifted his weight. "Would you let me walk you to your truck?" She stared at him, unsure if he deserved even that small gesture. But the music in the background, the golden leaves, the soft glow of lanterns strung across Main Street, it all softened her resolve in ways she hated. "Fine," she said, keeping her tone cool. "Just to the truck." They walked side by side through the festival grounds, neither speaking, both thinking too much. People waved, assuming they were together the way they used to be. Hannah kept her gaze forward. Carter kept stealing glances. When they reached her truck, she opened the door and stepped up into the cab. He rested one hand on the doorframe. Rain from earlier now dried in his hair. "Hannah," he said again, more softly this time. She didn't look at him. If she did, she knew she might break the distance she worked so hard to rebuild. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly, "but I'm asking for the chance to prove I've changed." Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Good night, Carter," she whispered, and she closed the door gently, leaving him standing alone under the falling autumn leaves. 2 days after the fall festival, the sky over Willow Creek looked bruised, thick clouds rolling over the fields like a slow-moving tide. Storm warnings came over the radio, but farm work couldn't wait for perfect weather. Hannah pulled on her worn boots and jacket, grabbed her tool belt, and headed toward the south fence line. A section of posts had started leaning after the last rain, and if she didn't fix them now, the cattle could push through. She preferred the company of stubborn fence posts to complicated men from her past. Wood and wire didn't lie. They either held or they didn't. She parked the truck near the hill and stepped out, the air cool and damp against her skin. The field stretched wide in front of her, grass rippling like waves beneath the wind. She knelt by the first post, pressing her shoulder against it to test the give. It wobbled more than she liked. "Great," she muttered. "Fall apart now, why don't you?" She was talking about the fence, but part of her knew she wasn't. She had just picked up the post hole digger when she heard it. An engine in the distance. Her shoulders tensed automatically. Out here, engines usually meant neighbors checking on cattle or kids joyriding after school. But lately, that sound meant something very specific. Someone very specific. The truck slowed near the hill and parked beside hers. Hannah didn't look up right away. "I swear I'm not following you," Carter called, his voice carrying over the wind. She tightened her grip on the tool. "Funny how you always seem to end up where I am." He walked closer, boots crunching over dry patches of dirt and old grass. He wore a faded navy hoodie and jeans, not the polished version of himself the city knew. He looked almost like the boy she grew up with, except his eyes were heavier now. He stopped a few feet away, hands raised slightly like he didn't want to scare off a wild horse. "Fence looks rough," he said. "Thanks, I hadn't noticed," she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. He smiled faintly at the sarcasm. "Can I help?" she scoffed. "With what exactly? You gonna negotiate with the post?" "A lot of this used to be muscle memory, remember?" he said quietly. "Before I traded tool belts for cufflinks." She hated that she remembered. Him hauling posts over his shoulder, laughing, singing off-key country songs while they worked. She also hated that part of her wanted the help. Storm clouds were piling up thick and fast. "If you slow me down, I'm firing you," she muttered. "Deal," he said, moving beside her. They worked in silence at first, the kind that felt crowded with unspoken words. Hannah dug while Carter steadied the posts, his hands reddening under the strain. Wind whipped through the field, carrying the smell of rain and damp earth. Every now and then their shoulders brushed as they moved around each other. Each accidental touch sent a pulse of memory through her chest. Barn dances, shared Coke bottles, fingers laced together in the back of his old pickup. She forced her focus back to the task. "Why are you really here, Carter?" she finally asked, not looking at him. He paused, bracing a post as she packed dirt around it with her boot. "I told you. I bought the Sawyer place, I'm staying." "That's not what I mean," she said, standing and meeting his eyes. "Why come back now? Why this town? Why me?" The wind seemed to still for a second, as if the field itself were listening. His expression shifted, less defensive, more exposed. He swallowed, glancing at the horizon before looking back at her. "Because everything I chased out there felt big and hollow," he said. "I thought if I had enough money, enough status, enough noise, I wouldn't hear what I'd done to you. To us." He took a breath, jaw tight. "But the truth is, Hannah, the farther I went, the louder your absence got." Her heart clenched at the word absence. She'd never heard him say it like that before. "You don't get points for missing me after you left," she replied, voice low but steady. He nodded, accepting the hit. "I know, I'm not asking for points." He shifted his weight, fingers tightening around the top of the post. "I'm asking for a chance to be honest. I wasn't back then." A drop of rain hit her cheek, cold and sharp. "Honest about what?" she asked. Carter looked straight into her. No dodging, no joking, no deflecting. "About why I left," he said. "Yes, I wanted success. Yes, I wanted out. But underneath all that, I was scared." She frowned. "Of what?" "Of not being enough for the life we dreamed about." His voice broke slightly. "Of failing you while you were close enough to see it." Pain and anger sparked inside her, battling with something softer she refused to name. "You think staying and failing would have hurt more than leaving without a word?" she asked. Her eyes burned, but she refused to blink. "You didn't even give me a choice, Carter." Rain began to fall harder now, speckling their clothes, dotting the dirt. He took a slow breath, face open in a way she hadn't seen in years. "You're right," he whispered. "I was a coward." He continued, rain dripping from his hair into his lashes. "I told myself I was doing the brave thing, chasing dreams, building a future, but the truth is I ran." He glanced at the farmhouse in the distance. "Not from this place. From what loving you would require of me." Hannah's chest tightened painfully. She had imagined 1,000 reasons why he left. Hearing this one out loud felt like pressing on an old bruise. "You don't get to come back and say the right words and expect everything to reset," she said, voice trembling despite her effort. "I'm not trying to reset anything," he replied gently. "I know I can't fix the past. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you those years back." Thunder rumbled somewhere far off, low and warning. He stepped closer, but not too close, hands still visible, as if proving he meant no harm. "But I can stand here and tell you the truth now, even if you never let me close again." The wind picked up, blowing her hair across her face. She pushed it back, trying to steady her breathing. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him his honesty came too late. Another part wanted to lean against his chest and let the storm wash everything away. Instead, she reached for the next post. "You're late, Carter," she said quietly. Too late. Rain started falling faster, each drop cool against her heated skin. He nodded slowly, shoulders sagging in defeat, but not retreat. "I know," he said. "And if too late is all I ever get from you, I'll accept it, but I won't lie to you anymore to make it easier on myself." That sentence lodged somewhere deep inside her, in a place she didn't want touched. She drove the shovel into the dirt harder than necessary, trying to bury the emotion rising in her throat. The sky cracked with a flash of lightning in the distance. They worked faster as the storm closed in, dirt turning sticky under their boots. At one point, the post slipped, and Hannah stumbled, her ankle rolling slightly on the uneven ground. Carter reached out instinctively, one hand catching her elbow, the other hovering near her waist. For a second they froze, breath mingling, rain dripping between them. Memories crashed over her, dances, kisses, whispered, "I love yous" that once felt unbreakable. She pulled away quickly, throat tight. "I'm fine," she muttered. He let her go immediately, hands up in surrender. "I know you don't need me," he said quietly. "That's not what this is about." She didn't respond, but the words echoed in her chest. They finished the last post just as the rain shifted from insistent to heavy. The field blurred into streaks of silver and gray. "Fence looks solid," he said, catching his breath. Hannah stepped back, examining their work. The line stood straight, steady, strong. Everything they hadn't been for years. "Yeah," she replied. "It'll hold." Her voice softened, almost against her will. "Thank you for the help." He looked at her like that simple thank you meant more than it should. "You're welcome," he said. Lightning flashed closer this time, followed quickly by rolling thunder. "You should get back before this gets worse." She nodded, but didn't move yet. Something in his face, exhausted, hopeful, humbled, kept her rooted for one heartbeat longer. As she finally turned toward her truck, he called her name over the pounding rain. "Hannah!" She glanced back, rain running down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. He didn't step closer, didn't try to reach for her. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, voice steady despite the storm. "I'm just asking you to believe that I'm not the same man who left." And for the first time, she didn't know if that possibility scared her or secretly gave her hope. The storm that had started at the fence line didn't ease up as night fell. It grew heavier, darker, loud enough to shake windows across Willow Creek. Hannah stayed inside, warming soup on the stove, while the wind howled across the fields like an angry animal. Rain battered the farmhouse roof with relentless rhythm, each strike a reminder of the unfinished work outside. She tried to read, but her mind kept drifting back to Carter, his honesty, his regret, the way her name broke in his voice. She hated how much she still felt. Hated that part of her had noticed the shiver in his hands, the exhaustion behind his eyes. Storms had a way of revealing cracks people tried to hide. By late evening, she filled a thermos of coffee and grabbed her flashlight. The cattle tended to pace when thunder grew too loud, and she needed to make sure nothing had spooked them enough to break the newly repaired fence. She pulled on her raincoat, braced herself against the wind, and stepped into the night. Mud splashed under her boots instantly. Lightning split the sky, revealing the vast pasture in snapshot flashes of silver. She scanned the field carefully, counting shapes, checking shadows. Everything seemed fine, until it didn't. A sound cut through the thunder. Not the cry of cattle, not the groan of the barn. A human sound. A shout. sharp, pain-filled. Her blood ran cold. She raised the flashlight and pointed it toward the far end of the pasture, just beyond the new fence line. There, someone was down. A figure half collapsed near the post they had worked on earlier. She felt panic slam into her chest, her boots slipping through the mud as she raced forward. The rain blinded her, wind whipping hair into her face. She kept running, praying the whole way she was wrong about who it was. It wasn't until she dropped to her knees beside him that she saw his face. Carter, soaked, pale, clutching his side with one arm and grimacing in pain. His hoodie was torn near the ribs, mud smeared across one shoulder. Lightning lit the scene again. His eyes squeezed shut, breath short and uneven. "Carter!" she shouted, shaking his arm. His eyelids fluttered open, unfocused. "Hannah?" Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. "What happened?" "Tried to check the fence," he murmured. "Ground gave out. Slipped down the embankment." He winced as he tried to shift. "I think I hit something on the way." She ran her hand gently along his side, feeling for fractures through the fabric. He sucked in a sharp breath, face contorting. "Okay, don't move. You can't walk like this." Rain poured over both of them, soaking her hair, her jacket, her jeans. She didn't care. "You shouldn't have been out here alone," she muttered, voice cracking with fear and frustration. "You could have." He grabbed her wrist weakly, forcing her eyes to meet his. "I didn't want you doing everything by yourself," he said. Even injured, even barely conscious, he was still trying to help. Something in her chest twisted painfully. "You idiot," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. "Why would you?" "Because I care," he breathed. Those words hit her harder than the storm. She looked away quickly, trying to think, trying not to feel. The pasture mud had turned slick, the wind threatening to knock them both down. She needed to get him off the ground and back to shelter now. "Okay, listen," she said firmly. "You're going to lean on me, and we're going to take this slow. No arguments." He nodded weakly. Pain had stolen too much strength for pride. She placed his arm over her shoulders and braced her legs beneath him. When she pushed upward, he groaned through clenched teeth but didn't fight her. Rain hammered them as they struggled to stand, slipping several times, catching each other in the dark. Her breath came out in ragged bursts, muscles burning, but she refused to let him fall again. Not this time. The walk back felt endless. Every step a battle against the mud, the wind, the weight of his injuries. His body leaned heavily against hers, heat radiating through soaked clothes. She could feel his heartbeat, too fast, too strained, against her shoulder. "Hannah," he whispered once, voice barely audible. She tightened her grip. "I've got you. Keep going." By the time they reached the barn doors, she was trembling from exertion. She pulled him inside and lowered him gently onto a stack of hay bales. The storm roared outside, but the barn was warm with the scent of pine shavings and sweet feed. Hannah hurried to grab blankets, a lantern, and the first aid kit. Her hands shook as she tore open supplies. Carter watched her through half-lidded eyes, breathing shallowly. "You're shaking," he said hoarsely. "Of course I'm shaking," she snapped, voice cracking. "You're hurt. It's pitch dark. You scared me half to death." Her chest heaved as she pressed gauze against his side. Lightning flashed through the window. Thunder rattled the rafters. Carter winced, but didn't move away from her touch. "Hannah," he whispered. She didn't look up. If she did, she wouldn't be able to stay composed. But then his fingers gently brushed her forearm. Weak, hesitant, apologetic. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't know if anyone would hear me out there." Rain drummed against the barn roof like an old country lullaby. And in that moment, she couldn't deny it. She almost lost him tonight. Her hands slowed over the bandage. Emotion swelled, raw and unfiltered, cutting through years of walls. "Carter," she said softly, breath trembling. "You can't just disappear and come back and disappear again." My heart. She stopped before the rest escaped. He lifted his gaze, pain mixing with something deeper. "I'm not disappearing this time," he said. The lantern glowed softly between them, casting a warm halo over his face. Even injured, even drenched, he looked different. like the storm had stripped him down to the truth. Hannah wrapped another blanket around him, brushing damp hair off his forehead. He closed his eyes briefly at the touch, as if memorizing the feeling. "You should rest," she whispered. "I'm staying until the storm stops." His lips curved weakly. "Good," he murmured. "Feels safer when you're here." The walls around her heart trembled, and for the first time in years she didn't force them back up. Outside, thunder rolled away into the distance, the worst of the storm passing. Inside, another kind of storm, quiet, emotional, undeniable, had only just begun. The storm passed overnight, leaving Willow Creek washed clean beneath a pale morning sky. Sunlight filtered through barn slats in thin stripes, landing over Carter's sleeping form. Hannah stood quietly a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful for someone who'd scared her nearly to death. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes. His hair still damp, one arm draped across his stomach. Something in that vulnerability made her chest ache. She hated how easily her heart remembered him. She checked the bandage gently, careful not to wake him. No new bleeding, no fever. Relief washed over her in a wave she hadn't been ready for. She exhaled shakily, realizing only now how tightly she had been holding herself together. How afraid she had been. How deeply his absence, even temporary, still affected her. It wasn't something she wanted to admit, not even to herself. When he finally stirred, a soft sound escaped him, somewhere between a groan and a sigh. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim barn light. A faint smile touched his lips when he saw her. "You stayed," he whispered. Hannah rolled her eyes, but her cheeks warmed traitorously. "Someone had to make sure you didn't pass out again." "That's a very dramatic way of calling me alive," he said. She shook her head, hiding the hint of a smile. "You're lucky you didn't break a rib." He shifted slightly and winced. "Feels like I did," he joked weakly. "Pain means you're still breathing," she muttered, turning away to tidy the medical supplies. He watched her quietly, his expression softer than she was ready to handle. "You were scared," he said gently. Her shoulders tensed immediately. "No, I wasn't." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Hannah, you were shaking." She didn't look back, distracted herself with an empty feed bag. "I was wet and cold. Anyone would shake." He didn't push further, but his silence said he didn't believe her, and she hated that he could read her so easily. She finally grabbed the thermos from last night and poured him warm coffee. "Drink this, slowly," she instructed. He took the cup with both hands, fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. The touch sent an involuntary shiver up her spine. He noticed. She could tell he did, but he didn't comment. He just sipped the coffee quietly. "You shouldn't be alone at the Sawyer place tonight," she said finally. He looked up, surprised. "Storms knock out power there all the time. And you're injured." His lips parted slightly. "Hannah, are you offering help?" She exhaled sharply. "I'm offering basic human decency. Don't make it weird." He smiled, a small, grateful, almost shy smile she hadn't seen in years. Then, "What do you suggest?" She hated that she had already thought it through. "You can stay in the guest room at the farmhouse until you're steady enough to be alone," she said. "It's not charity, just practicality." His breath caught, subtle but noticeable. "You'd really let me stay there after everything?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Don't make me repeat myself." Carter nodded slowly, something like awe flickering across his face. Hannah grabbed the blankets and motioned for him to lean on her again. He did, carefully, cautiously, trying not to put too much weight on her. But she felt it anyway, the familiarity of his presence, the warmth of him beside her. It was both comforting and dangerous. When they stepped out of the barn, the morning air was cool and sweet, puddles reflecting the pale sky. His steps were unsteady, but he pushed forward without complaining. She looped his arm over her shoulders, supporting him as they crossed the yard. Her breath caught when she realized how natural it felt to hold him again. He noticed. She saw it in the side tilt of his smile. "Don't get used to this," she muttered. "Noted," he said softly. Inside the farmhouse, she guided him to the guest room. The sunlight fell across the quilt her mother had sewn years ago. Carter paused at the doorway, his expression shifting. "I haven't been inside this house in so long," he whispered. His voice was full of memory, grief, nostalgia, longing. Hannah swallowed hard. "Things change," she said quietly. He sat on the edge of the bed with a slow breath. "Not everything," he said, eyes meeting hers. Her heart clenched, anger and affection battling fiercely. "You should rest," she said quickly. "I'll check on you again in a couple hours." He reached for her wrist gently. "Hannah, thank you." She froze, not because of the touch, but because of the sincerity in his voice. The old Carter always spoke with confidence. This Carter spoke like someone who knew the cost of mistakes. She pulled her hand back carefully, not harshly. "Get some sleep," she whispered, then stepped out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Hannah leaned back against the hallway wall. Her pulse raced, her throat tight. Having him under her roof again felt like a test she hadn't studied for. A reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she still wanted, even if she fought it. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. She whispered into the empty hallway, "Lord, don't let me fall for him again. Unless he's here to stay." Hannah spent the rest of the morning cleaning the kitchen, sweeping the floors and reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing. Anything to avoid thinking about the man asleep in her guest room. But even the steady rhythm of farm chores couldn't quiet her mind. Every time she looked toward the hallway, she felt that same tightness in her chest. Carter had been back in town for days, but this, him under her roof, vulnerable, honest, felt like the first real test of her heart. Eventually she made lunch, chicken soup and warm cornbread, the kind her mother used to cook on slow, rainy Sundays. She carried the tray to the guest room and hesitated before knocking. When she finally pushed the door open, Carter was awake, sitting upright against the pillows. His hair was tousled, his eyes tired but clear. He looked younger like that, stripped of the constant tension he carried in the city. "Smells incredible," he said softly. Her heart trembled at the warmth in his voice. She set the tray down and crossed her arms. "Eat slowly. You need strength." Carter smiled faintly. "You always did take good care of the people around you." Hannah ignored the compliment because she didn't want it to matter, but it did. "Don't make this sentimental," she warned. "I'm only feeding an injured man." He nodded, but his eyes held something unspoken. As he ate, she checked the bandage again. Her fingers brushed his skin lightly and he inhaled sharply. Not from pain, but from the familiar electricity between them. Her hand shook for a moment before she pulled it back. "Hannah," he said quietly, "you don't have to be so careful with me." She stepped back immediately. "Careful?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not being careful. I'm being practical." He chuckled softly. "I meant, you're treating me like you're afraid to get close." Her breath caught, stuttering in her chest. She looked away sharply. "You think too highly of yourself." But he didn't smile this time. "Hannah," he said again, gentler this time, "please look at me." She hesitated before finally lifting her gaze. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. Like the last barrier between them slid an inch out of place. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have said years ago." Her pulse quickened. She sank into the chair by the bed, bracing herself for whatever was coming. Carter took a slow breath like he was gathering the courage to peel back an old wound. "When I left this town, I wasn't running toward success," he said. "I was running away from myself." She frowned slightly. "I don't understand." He shifted, grimacing a little at the pain in his side. "I was 18, terrified, and convinced I'd ruin the one good thing in my life if I stayed," he said. "You were steady, certain, ready for a future. I wasn't any of those things." Her heart ached at the memory. She had been ready back then. "You could have told me," she whispered. "Instead, you walked away like none of us mattered." His eyes softened with regret. "I didn't tell you because I thought you deserved someone better," he admitted. "Someone who wouldn't break under pressure. Someone who wouldn't look at your dreams and panic." He swallowed hard. "Hannah, I thought leaving would protect you from the man I feared I'd become." Emotion twisted painfully in her chest. "You didn't protect me," she whispered. You shattered me. His face fell. I know. And I live with that. Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the truth finally spoken aloud. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, uneven and loud. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too warm, suffocating. Carter's voice broke the quiet. If I could take every moment of pain I caused you and trade it for my own, I would. The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face away, wiping quickly, but he saw. He always saw. Hannah, he whispered, voice raw. I'm not saying this because I want forgiveness. I know I have no right to ask for it. She clenched her hands together, trying to steady herself. Then why tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. He looked right at her, eyes shining with a truth so deep it made her stomach twist. Because you deserve to know the real reason, he said. You deserve the truth. You always did. Her breath hitched again. He leaned back slightly, exhausted but determined. I want to rebuild what I destroyed, if there's even a chance. Her heart twisted so hard she almost couldn't breathe. Carter, I don't know if I can trust you again. I know, he said softly. And I'm not expecting you to. He ran a hand through his hair, wincing slightly at the movement. But I can prove it, with actions, not words, every day, slowly, patiently. She stared at him, mind spinning, walls trembling. People don't change overnight, she whispered. No, he agreed, eyes never leaving hers. But storms have a way of washing things clean. Her throat closed. She looked at the bandages around his ribs, the bruises forming along his side, the exhaustion carved into his face. This wasn't the boy who left. This was a man who had been broken by life and rebuilt by humility. For a moment, neither moved. The space between them felt charged, fragile, sacred. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the window pane. Inside, the truth finally hung between them like a bridge no longer collapsing. Hannah, he whispered, voice trembling with honesty. I came back because I realized success meant nothing if you weren't there to share it. I came back because every road, no matter how far, led me home. Her heart broke and opened at the same time. But she wasn't ready to fall yet. She stood abruptly and smoothed her shirt, trying to compose herself. You need more rest, she said, the only safe sentence she could manage. He didn't argue. He simply watched her with quiet understanding. And for the first time, she didn't shut the door all the way when she left. Carter recovered slowly over the next few days, gaining strength one steady breath at a time. Hannah kept her distance at first, busying herself with chores, baking, working the fields, anything that kept her heart occupied. But every morning, without fail, she checked on him. Every afternoon, she brought him food. Every evening, she quietly refreshed his bandages even when her hands trembled. He noticed every gesture, every moment of care she didn't want him to see. And he treated each one like sacred ground. On the fourth day, he was strong enough to walk around the farmhouse on his own. Hannah found him outside near the porch, staring at the sunrise spreading gold across the fields. His breathing was slow, peaceful, almost reverent. This place, he said softly, it feels like what I've been chasing my whole life without knowing it. She crossed her arms, unsure whether to let that sentence in. Then why didn't you appreciate it before? His voice faltered. Because I wasn't the man who could. She walked past him toward the barn, but he followed, carefully keeping respectful distance. Hannah, he called gently. Can we talk? I think we've talked enough, she replied, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. He paused at the barn door, watching her as she fed the horses and tidied the hay. I know you're trying to protect yourself, he said quietly, but please don't shut me out when I'm finally ready to stay. Her hand froze on the saddle hook. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since the storm. What does stay even mean to you, Carter? He swallowed. It means waking up here. It means rebuilding the Sawyer place. It means being part of this town again. He stepped closer, one careful step at a time. It means showing up for you in every small and big way life asks. Her heart beat painfully hard. And if I can't trust that, then I'll earn it, he said, no hesitation, no pride. I'll earn your trust every day, even if it takes years." She looked down, tears threatening. "You broke something in me, Carter. Something I didn't know how to fix." He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You rebuilt yourself," he whispered. "Stronger than before, and I'm not here to undo that." Emotion crashed through her like a wave. She turned away, needing space to breathe. But as she stepped outside the barn, she saw something she wasn't prepared for. The entire Sawyer fence line, the one he'd been working on alone before the storm, was straight, clean, each board replaced and repainted. He'd finished it, injured, quietly. Without expecting her to notice, Hannah felt her throat close. He hadn't done it for attention or praise. He'd done it because it needed to be done. Because he wanted to be useful, dependable, present. Tears stung her eyes as she walked toward the fence, running her fingers along the fresh wood. Behind her, Carter approached slowly. "I told you I'd prove myself with actions," he murmured. She turned to him, her eyes shining with something she'd never let him see before. Not vulnerability, not longing, but hope. Real, trembling hope. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why fight for me after all these years?" He stepped close enough that she could feel his breath in the cool morning air. "Because I finally understand what love is," he said softly. "And it's you." Her heart broke open like the first light after a storm. Not with pain, with release. With truth she had tried to bury for too long. He reached for her hand but didn't pull, just held it gently, giving her the choice. She didn't pull away. "Hannah," he continued, voice trembling, "I didn't come back to ask for the past. I came back to build a future, if you'll let me." Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. For years she imagined what she would say if he ever came back. Anger, blame, closure, but none of it fit anymore. She took a shaky breath, looking up into the eyes of the man she once loved, and the man he had finally become. "You hurt me," she said honestly. "I know," he whispered. "You left me alone. I know. And you broke every promise you ever made." He swallowed hard. "I know." She stepped closer. "But you came back different." His breath caught. "And I'm different too," she continued, voice soft but steady. "No more waiting, no more chasing. If this happened, it has to be real, slow, honest." "It will be," he vowed, voice breaking. "I'll spend every day proving it." For the first time in years, she let her walls fall. Just a little. Just enough to feel the warmth of his hand close around hers. The morning sun bathed them both in gold, dust particles floating between them like small miracles. Hannah stepped closer, her forehead brushing his softly. His breath trembled. Hopeful, reverent, undone. "Welcome home, Carter," she whispered. He closed his eyes, emotion overwhelming him. His forehead pressed fully against hers, as if grounding himself in the moment he had prayed for. "Thank you," he breathed, "for giving me a chance I don't deserve." She smiled through tears. Don't ruin it. Never in his life had he been so certain of anything as the woman standing before him. And in the quiet, golden stillness, their hearts finally found their way back home. The weeks that followed unfolded like the kind of slow, quiet miracle only small towns seem to understand. Carter rebuilt the Sawyer place piece by piece, not to impress her, but to prove to himself that he could stay, that he could show up every morning and every night, that he could choose routes instead of running. Hannah didn't fall all at once. She fell in moments. In the way he carried lumber across the field at sunrise, in the way he listened instead of defended, in the way he showed up early to help without being asked. Little gestures, steady steps, the kind of love that wasn't loud, but lasting. They walked slowly, cautiously, honestly. No grand declarations. No rushing what needed time. Just presence. The kind of presence she had begged God for years ago, never knowing he would bring it back in a different shape, in a different season, in a man who had learned how to stay. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Carter stood beside her on the porch of the farmhouse, not asking for forgiveness, not promising perfection, just holding her hand like something sacred. "I'm here," he whispered, "for as long as you'll have me." And for the first time since he left, Hannah believed him. Because love wasn't the firework of youth anymore. It was the steady flame of adulthood, quiet, dependable, burning in all the places they thought had gone cold. When he finally pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, not with urgency, not with fear, but with the calm certainty of a man rebuilt, Hannah didn't cry out of shock. She cried out of peace. Because this time, he wasn't promising a future he couldn't hold. He was offering one he had learned how to build. Their story wasn't perfect, it wasn't painless, but it was real. A story of leaving, breaking, returning, and discovering that love doesn't always come back the way it left. Sometimes, it comes back different, stronger, surer, home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave your like, and tell me in the comments, should Hannah and Carter get a wedding episode? More stories of faith, redemption, and love are coming. See you in the next chapter.